Good morning, good morning. Welcome to the program. It's Jamaica Live. We're on Bridge 99. Welcome to the program. My apologies for not being here last week. We're going to try and make up for that today. Just to let you know, we're doing some adjustments to the program. We've been kind of on a monologue track. Well, not monologue, but a one-way track. And my producer and others have persuaded me that we need to allow for some participation by listeners. So in the last half hour of the program, that will be 12:30 Jamaica time. It will be 1:30 New York time, because remember, we link with Irie Jam at midday our time, 1 o'clock their time. We're going to open up the line so that those who want to join in the discussion, give us their view, share their perspective with us. We'll have an opportunity to do it. We'll still be doing interviews and so on, but we will take calls in the last half hour. Just to remind you as well that if you want to call in, our main line to the studio, 876-676-4996. That's 876-676-4996. But we have a whole heap of other numbers. We have 876-630-3327, 876-630-0625, 876-633-4692, and 876-633-4718. If I get a chance, I will repeat those numbers in the course of the program. Remember as well that we stream live, www.thebridge99fm, so that you can get on if you have access to the internet. www.thebridge99fm. And of course, we've been carried as well on Facebook, on Twitter, and Instagram. The Bridge 99 FM, that's all you need to get in on any of those platforms, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Today we're going to be delving into an issue that perhaps doesn't occupy the minds of ordinary Jamaicans, but and perhaps for understandable reason. A question of CARICOM. Whether or not, CARICOM has outlived its purpose, whether or not it has achieved as much as it can achieve. And we want to focus on it because next year will be the 50th anniversary of the formation of CARICOM. 50 years is long enough for anybody, any organization, to take shape. To put runs on the board and to be able to reflect and say, well, this is what we've accomplished in 50 years, and this is where we hope to go for the next 50 years. There are many people who are of the view that CARICOM really has not left the starting block yet. So we're going to be discussing that today, and we have some very interesting people lined up. We're going to be speaking with Sir Ronald Sanders, who is the ambassador of Antigua and Barbuda to the U.S. and the permanent representative of that country to the Organization of American States. But beyond that, a distinguished Caribbean diplomat and someone who is as knowledgeable as anyone else on the journey of CARICOM, what it has achieved and what it has not achieved. So we're going to be joined by Sir Ronald Sanders. And then we're going to be talking with Mr. David Jessup, who for many years was the executive director of the Caribbean Council based in London. And even though he has retired from that position, he continues to be a consultant to the council. He's a regular columnist in here in our local newspapers here. As a matter of fact, he had a column yesterday in the Glean, I think it was, on this question of CARICOM, with a CARICOM. And he has tremendous knowledge as well on CARICOM matters. Then later we hope to be joined by the opposition Shadow Minister of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade, Miss Lisa Hanna, Member of Parliament, but she will be able to give us the perspective of the opposition. And then we're going to be joined by Dr. John Rapley, who is a distinguished academic. He's currently based at the Cambridge University in England. He's also a senior fellow at the Johannesburg Institute for Advanced Study in South Africa. And he's no stranger to Jamaica. He taught, when last time I spoke with him, he said Jamaica is his second home. He taught here at the UWI for more than 10 years, and he was a regular columnist in the Gleaner. And he happens also to be one of the founders of CAPRI, the research think tank institute, Caribbean Policy Research Institute, based at the university. And then we're going to wrap up the discussion with Dr. Richard Bernal, who is a distinguished academic himself. He's former Jamaican ambassador to the United States and former Pro-Vice Chancellor for Global Affairs at the University of the West Indies. So we have an interesting program today. We hope that you will find it interesting, and we hope that you will participate. Remember, you can call us. The numbers again, 876-676-4996. You can WhatsApp us as well, 876-551-5782. And then the other lines to get into the studio here to put you straight online would be 876-630-3327, 876-630-0625, 876-633-4692, 876-633-4718. Looking forward to hearing from you. Has CARICOM reached its limit in terms of regional integration? That's the topic today. Let me give you some background. Our struggle for independence began after we gained universal adult suffrage, a right to vote, in 1944. Back then, it was almost unthinkable for a country of our size, with a population of just over 1 million people. It was almost unthinkable for a country of that size to exist as an independent country. There were other Caribbean countries, even smaller than Jamaica, that were also colonies of Britain, that were on the same path, moving towards independence and sovereignty. Trinidad, Barbados, Guyana, and a number of other smaller islands in the region. Britain felt that each of us was too small to pursue independence on our own, and that we should join together to form one nation and then talk about independence. The late Norman Manley shared this view, and starting in 1948, several consultations were held with the British government to create a federation that would constitute a nation of about 3 million people, still small by the standards that existed at the time, but one that would give us a better chance of success in managing our own affairs and in dealing with the rest of the world. That led to the creation of the West Indies Federation in 1958, with one government governing 10 different countries. It lasted only 3 years. By 1961, Alexander Bustamante arrived at the position that federation, in his view, was not right for Jamaica and that we should get out of it. Norman Manley felt that this issue was so critical, and I think it is to his credit, because he perhaps could have sought to avoid it. I mean, he would have faced a lot of problems back home, but he felt that the issue was so critical to the future of Jamaica that it should be put to the people for them to decide. A referendum was held in 1961. I think it was in September of 1961. And the Jamaican people voted to withdraw from the West Indies Federation. It was decisive, but not, could not say it was overwhelming, because 54% of the voters who went out to vote voted to withdraw, and a significant 44% voted to stay. But the majority had spoken. We became independent in 1962, and in a few weeks we will celebrate the 60th anniversary of that independence. But even after we became independent, we realized that as small, vulnerable countries located in the same region, we needed to work together and find common cause. Otherwise, the rest of the world would hardly take notice of us. We started out by finding a mechanism to trade with each other. The Caribbean Free Trade Association, what was called CARIFTA. And, we still have the CARIFTA Games, which is a throwback to that period. That was established in 1965. But that was not sufficient. We needed to collaborate in several other areas apart from trade. So in 1973, we established CARICOM as a Caribbean Community of Sovereign States, which was to be a regional integration mechanism designed to establish a common market. We're not talking about just free trade, no, we're talking about a common market where, things are supposed to be able to move freely. Just like moving, you can move your money, you can move your goods, you can move yourself from St. Elizabeth to Manchester without any difficulty. So we established a common market, which was to bring us closer together, and also to coordinate our activities in areas of economic policies and foreign policy. The treaty establishing CARICOM was revised in 2001 to create a single market and economy, which means that we're not just talking about a common market now, but you're talking about a single market, where, the regulations, the policies would have to be harmonized so that you can have a situation where one country is running a terrible deficit and another country is maintaining surpluses. All of this was to be brought together in terms of some kind of harmonization of economic policies. And that was intended to facilitate, as I said, the free movement of not just goods but people throughout the region. It was intended to mean that people would be free to move from one country to the other, to live, to set up their businesses, to work, or to look work. Virtually like moving from one parish to another parish in your own country, like in Jamaica. After almost 50 years, those ambitious goals have not been achieved. It was expected that by creating a free space across the region, we would be able to produce more goods and produce them more efficiently and competitively. And we would then be able to penetrate foreign markets better than we would have been able to do operating as separate, small, producing countries. That was expected to create more jobs for the people of the Caribbean. But exports from the region to the rest of the world, one of the crucial objectives of CARICOM, by taking advantage of those economies of scale and the free movement of the factors of production, our exports to the rest of the world have actually declined, not increased. Today, after almost 50 years of CARICOM, we still can't just pick up ourselves and go to another CARICOM country. They're going to stop us at the airport and ask us a whole heap of questions. Remember the Shanique Mary case? The slow progress of CARICOM in fulfilling its declared objective has long been a matter of concern. The problem on the face of it is that many of the commitments that individual countries have made, which are necessary to make the whole thing work, have not been honored. Prime ministers agree to do certain things when they meet, whether they meet in Port of Spain or in Bridgetown or in Nassau or in Georgetown in Ghana. But when they get back home, they don't follow through. They don't implement. They don't execute. Several studies have been done to identify what is wrong and what needs to be done to fix it. There was the West India Commission led by Sir Sridath Ramphal, which produced a voluminous report titled Time for Action. In 2016, Jamaican Prime Minister Andrew Holness asked me to chair a commission to evaluate Jamaica's relationship with CARICOM and to determine what it should continue to be, what that relationship should continue to be. That commission recommended that Jamaica should set some firm deadlines that if the individual countries did not fulfill their commitment within a period of 5 years, then Jamaica should withdraw from the common market and limit its involvement in CARICOM to those areas in which common cause can be found, very much like what the Bahamas does. More recently, a commission headed by Professor Avinash Prasad of Barbados was established to analyze the CARICOM problem. It basically recommended that CARICOM should adopt a new approach, not wait for everyone to get up to the same speed, but to proceed with those that are willing and ready, and leave the others to catch up and join up when they are ready. Even with that, what one might call a simpler approach, some people have referred to it as a multi-track approach. Even with all of that, nothing seems to be happening. The heads of government met 2 weeks ago in Suriname, and it does not appear that the process has moved even 1 inch. Certainly not from the public statements that have been made. Is this CARICOM thing a waste of time? That's the question I'm posing today. Are we flogging a dead horse? Is it that we are so insular, so jealous and protective of our own separateness that we don't want to be tied with other countries? We don't want other people mixed up in our business. We are prepared to fight our battles and to do our struggles on our own. That each of us, do we believe that each of us by ourselves can take on the rest of the world? Has CARICOM reached its limit in terms of regional integration? That's what we're delving in today, that issue. And we're very pleased to be joined now, as I indicated before, by one of the Caribbean's most outstanding and distinguished diplomats and knowledgeable on CARICOM matters. And I'm referring to the Ambassador of Antigua and Barbuda to the United States, Sir Ronald Sanders. Sir Ronald, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much. Good morning.
Good morning. How are you?
As well as can be in a fractured CARICOM situation, which you have described rather eloquently this morning.
Tell me, are you immune to frustration?
You know, Bruce, the truth is I've learned to become... yesterday, when the West Indies were playing India in the last few overs, my father-in-law, who is incidentally Sir Sridath Ramphal,
I know
mentioned just a few minutes ago as the chair of the West Indian Commission, was talking to me on the telephone, and he was watching this on television in Barbados. I was, as I am now, in Toronto on an official visit. And he said to me, "Are you watching cricket?" I said, "Sonny, the truth of the matter is I share your hope and your loyalty to the West Indian team, but I'm afraid the desperation is too much for me to abide watching yet another defeat." And he soldiered on to the end and had the same hopeless feeling that I did, but I could not stomach watching it, so I didn't. So all I can say is that the answer to your question is yes. I feel at moments levels of great desperation, but look, at the end of the day, I know that our countries are too small, too weak, economically, militarily, and in every other way, for any of us to believe that we can go it alone. And those who have tried it have failed. Those who have ventured out of CARICOM to try to forge alliances with others as far afield as the Soviet Union years ago, they failed too. CARICOM ultimately is the family to which we belong. It is a common civilization that we share, and it continues to be, in my view, our only prospect for the future.
But let me take an approach, Ron. That and bear with me. The CARICOM construct was not handed down to us from some holy place. We sat down and we decided that, look, this is what we want to do. That was 50 years ago. Now, is it that Is it that the circumstances of the time have changed? Is it that we were over-optimistic? Are we trying to pursue something that 49 years of experience have told us? You're trying to push this thing, but it's not going to make it because there are certain elements in that construct that just will not work. Are we at a point where we ought to just take a practical, clinical look and say, now, let us determine what it is that we are prepared to make work and then make that work?
Well, you know, I was always attracted to the practicality of the commission that you led in 2016 and the report you produced. I did not agree with everything in it, and you wouldn't have expected me to, but I agreed with most of what you said. And the most important thing about that report was pointing to the fact that there was a serious implementation deficit. And more than that, that the efforts to try to correct that have failed. And, you know, we raised a question of what was done 49 years ago, almost 50 years, in a couple of months' time, in forming the Caribbean Community and Common Market, CARICOM. Now, what we have to recall is that those leaders at the time who formed that organization were new to independence. They had not yet begun to taste the kind of power that they had assumed upon independence. And for me, what our individual flags and our individual national anthems and our individual parliaments and prime ministers and ambassadors and all of that created was the sense of division, not of unity. It created in each of us a sense of nationalism, which had not really existed before independence. And for political leaders, that independence, that sovereignty, is not so much the country's independence and sovereignty as their own. I think leaders like being leaders. They're politicians, prime ministers, and you must tell me if this is true or not. There are very few of them who are able to give up power easily. There are very few of them who are able to say, look, in the interest of the region, we have to surrender some of the authority we have at a national basis to a supranational regional authority, which is going to be able to implement the things that we as small countries cannot do on our own. We need to be able to pool our resources, our talents, our creativity, and turn this region into one place, one single market, one single entity that can provide for our people.
But that faces...
I think that is a leap too far, frankly, for them. They've not been able to make it, and it has been the biggest hindrance to the advancement of the regional integration movement.
Well, put it this way. That faces two serious challenges, and I want you to give me your thoughts as to how those challenges can be overcome. Firstly, and the idea of the West India Commission is something that I looked at very, very seriously. But you face an immediate problem where you are surrendering some elements of your sovereignty to an entity that is not accountable to your people. It raises serious constitutional issues. I mean, the European Union is different because they have a European Parliament and they elect their European representatives. So that is one challenge. The other one, which is perhaps even more serious, Ronald, is that the enthusiasm toward CARICOM is something that fluctuates with changes of government in the individual territories. How do you build a solid regional integration that clicks without the engine shutting down every now and again? When you have changes of government taking place and parties may come into power, and their view of CARICOM is completely different from the government that they took over from. How do you work that?
Well, I don't know how much of a difference really in many of the CARICOM countries is the attitude of the political parties that come into office, save and except in Jamaica. I think Jamaica has a bigger problem of political parties with a different attitude toward the integration process than exists, for instance, in the countries of the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States. I'm talking now about countries like Antigua and Barbuda, St. Kitts, Nevis, St. Lucia, Dominica, St. Vincent. Completely different attitude. I think political parties across the spectrum recognize that their strength lies in their integration. That is why, for instance, in the OECS countries, in those 6 countries, the smallest of the Caribbean, there has been a far greater level of integration than there is in other parts of CARICOM. They have, for instance, a single market. They have a single currency. They have a single judicial system. They have many single regulatory authorities, including for their banking system, their companies, and so on. So it's not across, that observation is not across the board. The difficulty, I suspect, is that because everybody in the region wants Jamaica to be a part of CARICOM, essentially the regard for Jamaica is high now, as it always has been. And it comes back to Eric Williams's curious mathematics when Jamaica decided it was not going to be part of the Federation by referendum. That 1 from 10 leaves naught. Because what he saw was a significant country being no longer a part of this process. So Jamaica is a part of the process, but it's Jamaica's own hesitancy about the integration process that I suspect drives part of the hesitancy we are seeing elsewhere. Now, I've been witness to this. I've sat in meetings where Jamaica does not turn up to a CARICOM meeting because the Jamaican representative believes that there is an opportunity with other countries, the United States or Canada or whoever it is, that does not serve their interests. So they're not part of the CARICOM discussion. I was shocked, for instance, at the Summit of the Americas, when CARICOM met beforehand to decide what would happen in the meetings with Biden and Kamala Harris. Jamaica wasn't there. It was invited to come, and eventually it did come on board in the meetings that we had with Biden and Harris. But at the essential point, it wasn't there. And there's always this reluctance. I'm sorry to say this because I value the Jamaican connection. I know how important it is. I know how important Jamaican leadership has been in the regional process, and incidentally, how important it has been in our relations with other countries. The weight of Jamaica is important.
Can I interrupt you, Ronald?
Jamaica was facing Jamaican hesitancy.
Let me interrupt you. I have to take a break. Just hold for me 1 minute. I'll be right back. Welcome back. Jamaica Live, we're on Bridge 99. Today we're talking about CARICOM, whether or not CARICOM has exhausted its purpose, whether it has reached as far as it can go. And we have on the line, very pleased to have him, Sir Ronald Sanders, who is the ambassador of Antigua and Barbuda to the United States. Ronald, let me put something to you. Well, let me ask you this. The good must not be made the enemy of the best, no?
Yes,
There,
of course.
there seem to have been an era of excitement, or certainly welcome, when the Avinash Prasad report was presented, because what it basically said, look, you don't have to wait until all 15 members are ready to run the same at the same pace. Let those who can and are willing and see the advantages and can overcome whatever constraints they have, let them proceed. What has been the response of government to that approach? Certainly, I mean, there were newspaper editorials here who said, well, thank God, CARICOM will now get a chance to go forward. But is it moving forward? Is it likely to move forward?
Well, I agree with you. When that report came out, of course, there were suggestions that the Avinash Prasad group made about certain countries that were ready to move forward should do so was not original. It's been around for a while because countries, people, commentators recognize that this unanimous decision making that is required by CARICOM was an obstacle to progress. If we all had, if a hare had to wait for the turtle to move, the hare that could have finished the race in 5 seconds couldn't finish it for over an hour. So there are hares and there are turtles in this integration movement. Unfortunately, what the integration movement has not done over time is to give those who are unconvinced of its capacity to deliver any good reason to change that opinion. And the Ramphel report, the West Indian Commission report of 1992, pointed ways in which some of this could be overcome. You too, Bruce, in your commission, pointed ways into which these things could be overcome. This CARICOM commission that Avinash Prasad led also contributed ideas. Now, there's no shortage of ideas as to what we could do. What the problem is political will.
What am I absurd?
You talked about the fact that the European Union have a parliament, an elected parliament. Well, why don't we? The Organization of Eastern Caribbean States does have a OECS parliament. And that OECS parliament could become an executive decision-making body because it meets, it talks, but unfortunately it's only consultative at the moment. But it can become legislative very easily. CARICOM could do the same thing, even if we started off with an assembly merely for the purposes of consultation. But so ideas could come forward by people who are appointed by governments of the private sector and the labor union to meet and put forward serious proposals at a parliamentary level. Started off as consultation with the view of becoming a legislature. What's wrong with that? Why could we not do that? If one part of the Caribbean could do it, it demonstrates that it is possible. Political will is what it comes down to.
Well, your father-in-law, who chaired the West India Commission and who presented that tremendous report. I mean, I've read it from start to finish. He gave the inaugural J. Arthur Brown lecture here in 2011, I think it was. That's 11 years ago. The frustration, the disappointment that came out of his presentation was palpable. Why should we believe that the Prasad report is going to be given any greater attention than the West India Commission report? One gets the sense, that these reports done at great, not talking about expense now, but great effort and energy and scholarly intervention. One gets the impression that these reports are used to cut some table that is wobbling.
I think you are right that the reports are written. They have great ideas. Politicians look at them, see threats in them to themselves, and decide they're not going forward with this. Let's look at that. Let's take a typical example. one of the essential proposals of the West Indian Commission report in 1992 was that we should establish a CARICOM commission. Now, it was going to be a commission of people that came from governments. It could be a commission made up of former heads of government with executive authority vested in them, but also with the participation of the Secretary General. And heads of government rejected it. Rejected it, why? Because they saw, I assume, that some authority would now go to a body other than themselves. Even though in Europe there is a European Commission, which is appointed in the same way that this commission was going to be suggested, that makes decisions for the European Commission. Now, we have to be able to recognize that our countries cannot do by themselves all of the things that need to be done. If we can identify those things that are better done together and put them into the hands of a decision-making body that has the authority to implement them and carry them out, what is wrong with that? Because ultimately the control of those bodies, if there's some excessive behavior, if there's some attempt by these bodies to go beyond their mandate, rests in the hands of heads of government. Who could control that at any, rein it in at any time? It seems to be a difficulty, but they weren't even prepared to give it a chance.
Ronald, we're out of time, but one last question. CARICOM celebrates 50 years next year.
Mm-hmm.
Are you expecting any new awakening, or is it just going to be a milestone that we slumber past?
Well, I don't. I think there'd be a lot of celebration, a lot of talk about how great CARICOM is. And look, the truth is, we have made progress, but it is not the kind of progress that we need to make at a time in the world when we are faced with enormous crises, and these crises are now touching the lives of people. We have an inflationary situation in every Caribbean country caused by external factors over which we have very little control. But together we might be able to do something about it. We still have resources in the Caribbean. If we had used them regionally, we could have overcome some of these difficulties. I look, for instance, in the business of fertilizer, which nobody can buy now because of the high prices. Yet we have urea, we have gas resources, we have a smelter in Trinidad, and if Guyana's gas, Suriname's gas, Trinidad's gas were to be used collectively to turn that plant into a regional organization, we may not only be able to produce fertilizer for our region, we may be even able to export it to countries like Brazil and Chile and others that are dependent on fertilizer from Ukraine and Russia.
Got to leave it there.
These are opportunities that we have.
Got to leave it there. Sir Ronald Sanders, thank you so much for joining us today. Let's keep the conversation going.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Nice to talk to you, Bruce. Bye.
Right. We're talking CARICOM today. We just finished a discussion there with Sir Ronald Sanders, Antigua and Barbuda's ambassador to the United Nations. We plan to be joined now, hoping to get him. We're trying to make contact with Mr. David Jessup, who is the former Executive Director of the Caribbean Council, based in London. A very useful organization which sort of provides a critical link between Caribbean countries and the important government agencies in the United Kingdom. And he is someone, he writes frequently in our newspapers. Here he had a column in the Gleaner yesterday. We haven't had him yet. Not on yet. We're still trying to get him. But CARICOM, in that discussion with Sir Ronald Sanders, some of the things that he talks about, useful though, or perhaps necessary though they are to make CARICOM work. I don't know how we're going to get that. I don't know how we're going to get over those hurdles. The problem with the commission that was proposed by the Sonny Ramphel report, Sridhar Ramphel report, and it's something that I had difficulty with, because you would be transferring to this commission critical executive authority. In other words, that commission would be able to take decisions that are binding on the individual member countries. But that commission will be made up of people who are appointed by the heads. I think it was proposed that the commission should consist of 3 or 5 people. So you'll be talking about more than a kitchen cabinet. And they would be empowered to take decisions, and when they take those decisions, countries have to comply. And the big question that I raised at that time, which has never been satisfactorily addressed, when they take a decision that turns out to be unpleasant in a particular country, or the people in a country don't like it, who do the people hold accountable? Is it their government? How can you hold that government accountable? I mean, if I became Prime Minister today, and there's a commission in place, and that commission takes decisions that affect the people of Jamaica, I didn't appoint that commission. I come and find them. What do I say to the people when they say, well, don't tell us no rubbish about no commission do this, because we never vote for no commission, we vote for you. And therefore, you are the one that we must hold accountable. I mean, there are fundamental constitutional issues that would have to be addressed. Do we have Mr. Jessup online? Mr. David Jessup, welcome. Oh, Lord, having some technical issues. Is he there? Trying to make connection. I thought that in these modern times, communication would be just a matter of pressing a few buttons. I didn't know we still have some kind of problem. Trying to link with Mr. David Jessup, of the former executive director of the Caribbean Council, based in London. Some people try to draw comparisons between CARICOM and the European Union. They're not one and the same. The European Union is more than just a single market and economy. They have structures. For example, they have a European court. So there are certain matters that are reserved for determination by the European court, and those decisions by the European court have effect in the member countries. There's a European Commission. There's a European Parliament. So every now and again, elections are held in the various countries of Europe to elect members to that European Parliament. Even though they remain sovereign, they have their own individual constitutions and sovereignty. But certain of their sovereign authority they have ceded, placed in the hands of this European body. And it may very well be that is the only way it can work. And if that is the only way that it can work, then we in the Caribbean better just look at it and say, well, if that's the only way it can work, then we have to decide. Are we prepared to go that way, or no, we're not going that way at all? Some people will argue, well, we went that way in 1958, and it didn't work. Some other people will argue, well, you have to look at the reasons why it didn't work. But I don't think that CARICOM is going to go very far the way it has been moving. I think there would have to be something very dramatic to get it to move, because the same problems that have plagued it from the outset, the unwillingness to implement the decisions, even that you agree. When the CARICOM heads meet, the prime ministers and the presidents, they take decisions, Now, whether or not some just go along, although they're not very enthusiastic, or whether some just go along because they know they have no intention of implementing it. So, but for a peaceful life, just say yes. And then when you get back home, you just forget about it, or you just make up your mind that, boy, I'm not doing that. And And there are some real issues. I remember when I was in office, we had a CARICOM heads meeting in Port of Spain. And that time, David Thompson was the Prime Minister of Barbados. And we were having problems. Remember the Shanique Mary case? We were having problems with Jamaicans who tried to enter Barbados. And, you know, one of the things that the single market and economy was supposed to do was to allow for free movement of people. And I remember getting into an argument with David Thompson. I said, well, you know, we allow people from other Caribbean countries to come here without any problem, no hassle, so long as they're not involved in drugs or things like that. Why are Jamaicans not being allowed to enter Barbados? And he made a point which I had to pause for a moment to say, but you know, sometimes we quarrel about these things, but we don't look at all of the implications. He said, now look, Barbados attracts people from Jamaica, even more so from countries that are closer to Barbados, because Barbados has a relatively high standard of living, you know, in terms of this infrastructure, the services, and so on. And David Thompson made the point. He said, when people start arriving here in huge numbers, and my schools start to get overcrowded, Barbados has the best education system in the Caribbean. But when my schools start to get overcrowded, instead of having one teacher to every 25 students, I now have 1 to 40. And the quality of education starts to drop. What do I say to the Barbadian people that I allowed that to happen? So there are some real practical things that you cannot fail to take into account. And that's why the discussion has to look at all of the angles. We're not getting through to Mr. Jessup. Oh, Lord, I'm so disappointed. I was looking forward to hearing from him.
You want an audio clip? You want an audio clip in the meantime?
Yeah, please. Yeah, we're gonna try and see if we can bring in some clips that we had of people who have communicated on social media, who have joined in the discussions. Let's hear them.
Do I believe that CARICOM has reached its limit regarding integration? No, I don't think we've reached our limit regarding integration. I think CARICOM has done pretty well to some extent when it comes to, you know, getting the Caribbean name out there to the world and as it relates to trading and so on. But I believe that there's so much more that can be done. You know, the Western culture has such an impact on Caribbean nationals. And it's really difficult for persons who would have been living in Europe or in the States to move back before retirement, you know, because they got so accustomed to simple things. I mean, things like dealing with banks or something like the internet. In countries, some countries in the Caribbean to this day, you still can find communities that has one house with internet and everybody has to go there and pay to make international calls or just to use a computer, you know. And these are the little things that has to change for us to actually bring our economy up to a level, to a standard that can be recognized worldwide. You understand? I think there's so much more to be done, but they have been doing, you know, some good things. For example, there's this thing called the CSME, it's a certificate that is really good, especially for Caribbean nationals who are just finishing school. With the certificate, you can actually live in any CARICOM state and not have to worry about a work permit. You can live there as long as you want. Once you present the certificate, you could be able to work and, you know, you're going to have no problems. And to me, that's great potential. That shows the great potential that we can reach if we are to adopt some of the things from the Western culture, even if we don't bring some of those things to the Caribbean, you know, just come up with alternatives that will work well for us. We want to be able to send and receive money simply, between the Caribbean and the States, or the Caribbean and Europe. In Jamaica, we have to stand up at the Western Union and the MoneyGram line for hours just to get some money. It's ridiculous, So these are the simple things I think that can be worked on and really put us to the level that we want to go.
CARICOM has been around for a astounding 45
news that we picked up on social media in response to the topic today. Some of the people who are cynical towards CARICOM and feel that it's not necessary, they use as an argument, Singapore. Singapore is smaller than Jamaica. Do you know that Singapore is a little smaller than the parish of St. Thomas in size? It has a heavy population for its size. I mean, they have a population of, I think, about 3 million. And Singapore was part of a federation with Malaysia, and they left that federation, went on their own, and look at what Singapore has done. We can't just end that argument there, because there are several other things that have to be taken into account. One of which is the fact that nobody with an objective mind can say that Singapore was able to do all of these things in a free and open democratic society, because it was far from that. And Lee Kuan Yew himself admitted it. I mean, he said that democracy is the most difficult form of government and produces some erratic results. I don't know that we can say, well, Singapore did it, so let us try and do it. Well, one can argue that we've been trying to do it for a long while, and we are nowhere near Singapore in terms of what our achievements have been. We hope the discussions are going to continue. We're going to be taking the break shortly. Am I hearing right? That David Jessup, we finally located him. David, are you there?
Yes, I am.
We had difficulty linking up with you. Can we just? We're up on the midday break here. Can we just take a break and then we'll come back to you?
Of course.
Welcome back. It's Jamaica Live. We're on Bridge 99, broadcasting here from Kingston, Jamaica. But we will be linking momentarily with Irish Jam in New York, so that we'll be talking as well simultaneously to the Jamaican diaspora in the New York area. And of course, we stream live on Instagram, as well as on www.thebridge99fm. We've just managed to link up with Mr. David Jessup. I told you before that he's the former executive director of the Caribbean Council based in London, and is now a consultant to the council. We're talking today about CARICOM. Has CARICOM exhausted its potential in terms of regional integration? And we're pleased to be joined as well, or I'm hoping to be joined as well, by the opposition spokesman on Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade, Member of Parliament, Ms. Lisa Hanna. David, are you there?
Yes, I am. Yes.
You had a column yesterday, and one of several columns that you have written on this CARICOM matter. You're not a Caribbean man, although you're right as if you are. As an objective outsider, if I can use that term, is CARICOM making any sense? Is it? Does it have much further to go?
Firstly, I should say I spent 50 years working with the Caribbean, both as a journalist and with lots of industries on the end of preference and making certain that sugar and rum, etc., got a fair deal. So I hope what I say has some sort of background to it. I'm very much, and have been most of my working life, very much in favor of CARICOM. Indeed, I'd hope that CARICOM would have moved far further, far faster than it has, to the extent that it might have been at this point working out how to have an arrangement with the non-English speaking Caribbean. But sadly, over the last, 12 months or so, I've observed ever since the Ramphal report, your report, the report by Avinash Persaud, virtually nothing seems to happen, and the same rhetoric goes round and round in circles. So I take the view that while I would love to see CARICOM functional, move on, recognize that the world has changed and the Caribbean has changed, it's really not doing that. So in my most recent column in the Gleaner, basically I was suggesting that the real test of CARICOM and whether it has a future is whether it can deliver what it's promised at the most recent heads of government meeting on food security and the links to transport and industrial policy. So I want to see CARICOM succeed, but I've become more and more skeptical.
Are there some fundamental aspects of the CARICOM concept and construct that have prevented it from moving forward? And are we ignoring those? Have these reports in any way addressed what may be some real root problems that will forever be impediments to CARICOM achieving the goals that it has set out?
I think so. I mean, firstly, I think one has to accept that CARICOM established 50.
What is going on?
Economic growth, there are regional disparities, there are differences over a whole range of issues, from foreign policy through to the common external tariff. And the sense I have is that nobody, because of the governmental structure, the governance structure of CARICOM, is prepared to grip these. So you have a scenario where you have a body without executive authority, where decisions are ad referendum to governments, that even the most fundamental key decisions require often local legislation or adaptation of legislation. And I simply don't see the political will in some CARICOM countries to take that forward. So from the outside, what I'm observing is rhetoric and promises, indeed even at the most recent CARICOM heads, even deadlines. But then there's no way of enforcing the decisions. There's no transparency.
Yeah, but
sadly, just to finish on this point, sadly, I don't even necessarily see the kind of journalism in the Caribbean that can take an overview of what's happening in individual countries and hold countries to account.
Well, let's pick up on that very point, David, because that may be the nub. Remember where we started. We started with the concept that we needed a political union in order to make all of these regional aspirations achievable. That ran into problems, and it is like something that hardly anybody wants to talk about, because it sparks fly whenever you talk about it. But the commission, the experience has been, as so demonstrated by the West India Commission report, that this thing is not going to be able to go very far, very soon, if there is not some regional executive authority. And that's where the idea of the West India Commission came about. That is something that I don't think is going to bounce. And Jamaica is not the only one that is uncomfortable with it. I was surprised, for example, when I was asked to chair the commission to look not at CARICOM, but at Jamaica's relationship with CARICOM. And some of the recommendations that we made, which we thought would have made it work. And we went on to say, if that can't work, then Jamaica must review its position. But I was surprised at some of the leaders in the region who I thought were ultra-regionalists. I mean, these were committed people to regionalism. At the discomfort that they found with some of the recommendations which were intended to just get this thing done once and for all and stop fooling around. It was almost as if, we can't go there. We have to continue to move inch by inch. Can this thing work without an executive authority that drives it? I'm sorry for anybody who comes in as Secretary General, because they get blamed for a lot of the failures, and when they have no control over what happens in national parliaments and in national cabinets. Can this thing go anywhere if we don't get over that hump? And if we're not going to be able to get over that hump, why we don't just admit it and sit down at our own table and say, well, if that's the case, let us recalibrate and let us basically say, well, this is as far as we can go, and we're going to make that far work as best as possible.
Sadly, I agree with you. I think sort of the fragmented nationalism of the Caribbean has become more and more acute in recent years. And I suspect it's going to get worse, because what I'm observing at the southern end of the Caribbean is Barbados, Guyana, Trinidad, and Suriname beginning to recognize that geography and proximity means that they can develop the kind of relationships that perhaps CARICOM was originally intended to inspire. So I do agree with you that if, in the case of Jamaica or indeed other countries in the region, ought to be more honest. But what I don't see is any politician that's prepared to say nowadays, an elected politician nowadays in government, who is prepared to say to make the sort of point that you've just made, is why doesn't the region sit down and say, well, how do we work this thing out?
David,
so I suspect...
Can I interrupt you? I want to bring Lisa Hanna into the discussion. I'm sure you know Lisa. She's the opposition spokesperson on foreign affairs and foreign trade. Miss Lisa Hanna, are you there?
I'm right here. Hi, Mr. Goulding.
Thank you so much, Lisa, for joining us.
Hi, Mr. Jessup.
I have David Jessup on the line. Lisa,
Yes.
give us your take. We've been through several commission reports. All of them basically make almost the same diagnosis, if not the same prescription. We're not implementing things that we have decided. It's not even so much that we have difficulty deciding, although that itself is a problem, but even the limited things on which we seem to be able to find agreement and common cause, we're not implementing. Are we flogging a dead horse?
No, I don't think we're flogging a dead horse. As a matter of fact, I think the 33 recommendations that came out of the report that you chaired that commission with, I think many of them are still yet to be implemented. And then there's another report before us. I think I wasn't listening to the discussion before, but I assume that most of what was discussed was this lagging behind. And one of the things that you and I spoke about when I met with you, talking about how your deliberations went, and you were very clear that, look, unless we really strengthen the organs of CARICOM and somehow recalibrate all of the attendant issues that give meaning to private sector being able to invest across it, things like shipping. Well, I can speak from not with the political hat, but with the other hat. It's things like banking, shipping, the free movement of labor. Those are some of the things that we need to really focus on. But I really believe that the future of it lies in expanding CARICOM. In other words, CARICOM represents, 8% of the world's nations. And even though our numbers are minimal, we represent a strong bloc. So it's going to take courageous, honest conversation to implement those things, putting the financial backing behind it. And that boldly says, look, we're finally serious about making this thing work. But I don't think it's flogging a dead horse. I think the world looks at leadership in CARICOM, particularly in Guyana and Barbados and in Jamaica, and they recognize that we are a powerful set of people, and I think CARICOM just needs to realize that we are powerful together rather than splintered.
What David and I were discussing when you joined the discussion, Lisa, was we went back to the recommendation that came out of the Sonny Ramphal report, which basically said that you need an executive authority to drive CARICOM, which would involve individual governments ceding some of their political and executive authority to this body. I think the proposal originally was that it should be 3 or 5 persons, eminent Caribbean, people, who would basically make decisions not of their own, but certainly the implementing decisions arising out of the decisions of the heads of government. But in terms of the implementation, they would be able to take executive action to put those decisions into effect in all the member countries. That raised a number of concerns. I remember it came about when I was leader of the opposition, and the first question I asked is, and to who are they going to be held accountable? Because, you know, if they take decisions that go into effect in Jamaica that have certain consequences, it is the government of Jamaica that the people are going to hold responsible, because the people are going to say, well, we never put these people in charge of us. The question I want to put to you is, and can I say this, and I believe I said this to you when you and I met, I was surprised to find that Jamaica was not the only one that had difficulty with this construct, with this concept. Several other countries. I'm not sure that there is any that is enthusiastic about it. But David and I had sort of reached the conclusion that unless you have such an authority, it cannot work. And if you cannot get such an authority, then you need to really sit down and say, well, gentlemen, this is as far as CARICOM can go. Let us recalibrate it. Let us understand what we should expect of it, and stop dreaming and having all kind of fancy hopes about a region that is going to operate like the European Union, because it's not the European Union, and it doesn't have the...
No, and we don't have similar...
David, am I reflecting the discussion accurately?
Yes. What I'm interested to hear is how you get from A to B, and how you establish even a minimal executive authority with a limited amount of decision-making power.
Well, I just came back from meeting with the State Department, the head of the director of the Caribbean desk at the Bureau of Hemispheric Affairs. And what came out of the Summit of Americas was various committees looking at food security, energy in the Caribbean, and chaired by Mia Motley, one by, I believe, Ghana, the Prime Minister of Ghana. President of Ghana. So there are opportunities that lie in the mix because of some of the existential pressures and real life detrimental catastrophes that we're up against. I mean, if you look at what is happening with climate change around the world, you recognize that climate change as one of those commissions, and that is the one Prime Minister Motley is chairing, is going to seriously threaten small island states like ours. The reason why I make that point is there is a fierce urgency of no. And if all of us in CARICOM recognize that, then we are able to sit at a table and say, look, here are the immediate things. Because all the reports that I've read, every one of them coming out of CARICOM, even the latest one, I believe it was a 9.58. I don't remember the name in the full name. But all the reports that I've read recognize that strengthening the CARICOM bond is dependent on achieving real economic integration and eliminating the barriers to entry for whether it's capital, labor, and goods. That is achievable. I don't know that you need necessarily an executive body, and here's the reason why I say it. Everybody just needs to sit down around the table and identify these are the 10 things that we want to achieve. I believe it came down to about 12, Mr. Golding, a 12-point plan in response to COVID-19 at one point. But even the report that we argued in Parliament that had your recommendations, I don't believe anything has been done about it. And then another report came after that. So the thing that I agree with both of you with is that there is this denial that we don't need to do anything and that we can continue to just kind of teeter along with policy and talking.
Is the CARICOM model, the CARICOM framework, not its own obstacle, in the sense that what I gather you to be saying is taking a more transactional approach.
Yes.
We need to open up markets so that we can achieve economies of scale, for example.
Correct. And efficiencies.
You're going to have a problem. You know what one prime minister said to me when I was berating them that, you guys will not open up to free movement. He says, look, I have a lot of people living in my country now who, this was the Prime Minister of Antigua. He says he was fast approaching the point where his voters list would have more non-Antiguans than Antiguans on it. And he says that poses some serious political issues that would have to be addressed.
That is one of the things that I think you and I can agree on, that most governments in CARICOM plan according to the 5-year election cycle or whatever their election cycle is. So the decisions that they take sometimes are more popular and expedient rather than right.
But if what we're seeking to achieve, though, Lisa, is we want progress for our countries, both individually and regionally. We want to explore the areas where those opportunities can reach.
Well, I believe where they lie is you have to have the Secretariat's financial and operational framework, and you have to have an entire recalibration of the forms of intra-regional trading arrangements within a structure that can engage the region's private sector. So if that can happen, I think we're well on our way. But I can tell you, as a family that also operates and does business in CARICOM, sometimes it is very difficult with the free movement of labor. So it's difficult in terms of banking. There was a forum that I was in recently where one person was saying that we should have a single currency. And then another person got up and said, do you think this particular country would want to, who has a fixed exchange rate? So I think if I say that, you'll probably know.
A former prime minister of Bahamas said not in his lifetime. You wouldn't expect.
So I think where we are now, looking at how the world is moving, CARICOM has to sit down together and identify which parts of all of these reports we want to implement.
But the cynic will ask you why. The cynic will ask you why. For example,
because
we have more transactional relations with Cuba in terms of development efforts, but we're not integrating with Cuba.
Well, we know why. Because of some of the businesses can't even outrightly come out. I
know. Yeah. But the fact is that we could continue to collaborate with Cuba in terms of health, in terms of education, but we don't have to get into some sort of framework.
No, but I think just when we decided to have diplomatic relations with Cuba 50 years ago, that was a detrimental decision that was taken, but it has redounded to our best interest. I believe with what is happening globally, CARICOM is better standing together, and the moment that leaders recognize that sometimes on the negotiating table, let us not try to win all individually, but let us try and see how we can forge forward together. Now, that will take courage, and it will take people saying, well, we might not be able to achieve all of this, like what you're saying with the Antiguan Prime Minister, but that will happen. They just don't go on the voters list.
David.
If you are.
Yeah, sorry, Lisa, finish your point.
No, go ahead.
David, next year, CARICOM celebrates 50 years, huh? And I have no doubt that you're going to have some pomp and pageantry and ceremony. We're going to show off the Caribbean culture and so on. And we're going to hear some robust speeches. Is there any more that we should expect? Or is it going to be another 50 years of meandering? What do you think? Is it that CARICOM has to wait for a whole new generation of leaders? Because I wouldn't hold my breath on that, because we have had generational change within CARICOM, but it hasn't really made much difference, has it?
It's true on the generational change issue. I was interested in some of the comments made by the new Prime Minister of Grenada at the recent Head Summit. But in fact, if you read the majority of what he said, it tended to go with the consensus. But going back to Ms. Hanna's point, one of the things that I wrote in my column in the Gleaner yesterday is one ought to perhaps have a test of whether CARICOM can deliver something. And one of the, for me, the most key issues is the delivery of food security. Now, there are timelines attached to that, the removal of non-tariff barriers, etc. And one of the things that I would hope politicians in the region could do is actually measure other governments' performance against the promises they made, as opposed to the non-delivery. Now, I know that's difficult. I know in terms of intra-CARICOM relations, that's not always easy. But somebody has to hold CARICOM to account.
Well,
otherwise, just to finish the point, Bruce, is otherwise next year you'll end up seeing a situation where CARICOM celebrates 50 years of achievement and another 50 years ahead. And the media and the
Lisa,
everybody else.
If I can make,
Lisa, here is our dilemma.
No, but let me just add to Mr. Jessup's point. So and let me make it really local and granular. There's a place in St. Anne, right on the border of my constituency, called Douglas Castle. Mr. Golding would know about Douglas Castle. Douglas Castle plants lettuce, pak choy. It is a leading Caribbean supplier of vegetables. The large farmers in Douglas Castle, two particular ones, are having to move to produce in Clarendon. Why? Our rainfall in May, certainly for this year, and our rainfall in Jamaica is decreasing. So farmers would plant clear the land in January, February, March, plant in April, hoping for rain to reap in July.
And they're probably moving to Matney now.
No, they're moving out of Matney and going over to Clarendon. We have two major capital investment projects, the Essex Valley water project out in St. Elizabeth, and the other one for Clarendon and St. Catherine. The United Nations just did a study in Jamaica looking at the vulnerability of farmers, and Jamaica is the only country that has said, look, we need sustainable irrigation systems to help our farmers because we're running out of rain. If you're looking around the world at what is happening with climate change and the extensive heat waves that are taking place, I just got back from New York and you could not even go outside in the city because it was so hot.
Yeah, but put this in the CARICOM context, though.
Yeah, I'm going to. What Mr. Jessup is saying and what I have said about food security, this is an urgent crisis because if Jamaica now is having the kinds of weather patterns, this is one way that CARICOM can be held accountable.
Are we prepared to pay that price?
But we have to, or people are going to die.
Guyana alone, If you stand up on the banks of the Demerara for too long, you grow root. The place is so fertile. Now, Guyana alone can feed the entire Caribbean and have extra food left over. David, if we were to remove those barriers that you are talking about, the farmers up in Lisa Hanna's constituency are going to get wiped out. Which government is going to go prepare to face them to say, well, look for food security?
But it's the same fault that we've had all our lives. We're afraid to have reciprocal trade agreements, reciprocal arrangements where we open up our markets to allow goods to come in. Because guess what? We don't have the kind of export value-added goods to do the same. Now, that is something Jamaica has to deal with. That is not Barbados' fault, and that's not Guyana's fault. Jamaica also, while it is doing intra-regional trade, has to recognize we have to trade with the world.
But Lisa, what it would mean is that we would have to say, well, Guyana, you are better at agriculture because of your God-given assets there.
But if we move the tariffs,
but we would,
people are cheaper.
But we would have to be able to transition our farmers into something else that can.
But that is something I've been writing on and speaking about. We need to be efficient and do the things that we're efficient in, and having economies of scale and producing the value-added products for export. But what the point, I'm sure Mr. Jessup made it, I've been making it, is that Jamaica pays some of the highest prices of food in the world. If you are able to remove those barriers of trade and remove the tariffs, if Guyana is a person who is going to produce and Jamaica can produce value-added things. If you had the kind of transportation mechanisms to trade intra-regionally, it would redound to the region's best interest.
As a consumer, I would love it. If I were a farmer, I'd be worried.
I would love to it. No, but you see, but you can structure your farming. And what Jamaica also needs are more factories so that we can create the value added and not necessarily produce only the primary products. Most of when you see some of the things that we consume in Jamaica, the value added is in Costa Rica and in Domrep, but they have incentivized private sector production so that on the value chain, the farmers know that they're planting bananas and planting, but they know that you can actually have a guaranteed market and you match the supply and demand so that the farmers always have a market. That's what we don't have, and I think that's where sometimes the discussion gets lost. Because farmers need to recognize, and we need to put them in things that we're competitive in.
We're out of time. Last word for you, David.
So I listened to what you've both been saying, and to me the answer is a multi-speed CARICOM where you can gradually make transition that protects your farmers, but eventually ends up with a regional industrial policy.
Interesting.
Thank you both very much. Lisa Hanna, Opposition Spokesman on Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade, and Mr. David Jessup, who is the former Executive Director of the Caribbean Council based in London. Thank you both very much. Welcome back. It's Jamaica Live on Bridge 99. Need to hail up Beauregard at Irish Jam in New York. Beauregard, are you there?
Greetings, Mr. Golden. How are you doing, sir?
Not bad. You had a heat wave there over the weekend, didn't you?
I'm telling you, it was terrible. For the last week, we're in the 90s, close to 100, but we're back in the 80s today, so it's a little bit cooler, yeah. Much cooler today.
Yeah. Well, you may be a little better off than the people in London and in other parts of Europe, because I saw something on one of the cable channels last week that only 8% of the houses in England have air conditioning because it's not something that they normally need. And now they're having sweltering heat and they have to be fanning themselves with newspaper and anything that we can find.
Well, I guess this goes to show that global warming, as they say, is really happening.
Yeah, but you've cooled down now, though.
Yes, we're much cooler on this side. We're enjoying the weather right now.
Yeah, that's
today.
good. We're talking about CARICOM today because, next year CARICOM will be marking its 50th anniversary. I say marking because I'm not sure I can say it will be celebrating because there's so much in terms of what it set out to do, so much that it has not achieved, no? So today we're talking about what is wrong. Is it that it has done as much as it is capable of doing, and therefore we really shouldn't be beating it over the head because it can't do any more? So we need to, recalibrate our own expectations. Or is it that the will is not there, and if the will is not there, how do we find the will?
I was listening to the conversation with your guest, Mr. Jessup, and also Miss Lisa Anna, and I also had a question. Very interesting conversation, and just to go along the lines of what you just stated, I had questions myself where I was asking how successful has CARICOM been for the last 49 years, and also have we exhausted all avenues and possibilities in making it work?
One of the problems, you see, Bo, is that, and it's something I've said before, we're trying to integrate 15 different countries at the level of the leadership. Yes. But the average Jamaican don't know anybody from Antigua, Him don't know anybody. Most Jamaicans don't know anybody that come from Dominica or St. Kitts.
Yes.
What used to hold them together to some extent was West Indies cricket, but that is not doing such a fabulous job these days. So we're trying to integrate people from different parts of the world purely on the basis of our common history. But then our history is also common with many countries in Africa, which, were colonial countries. And we really have not done much. When I was at university, we used to have two boats, the Federal Palm and the Federal Maple.
Yes.
And those boats used to run up and down from Jamaica to Barbados down to the other islands. And I remember as students, As students, we used to be able to buy a cheap ticket and we go down there and we meet some people from Antigua and some people from Trinidad and so on. But not even that. It costs you more to fly from here to Trinidad than it costs you to fly from here to New York. You know?
Yeah.
So it's part of the problem. We're going to continue the discussions.
All right, sir.
We're going to be joined now by Dr. John Rapley. No stranger to Jamaica, no stranger to this program either. We've had him on before. John is a distinguished academic, currently based at Cambridge University in England. He's also a senior fellow at the Johannesburg Institute for Advanced Study in South Africa. And as I said, no stranger to Jamaica. He has taught here. He lectured at the University of the West Indies for about 10 years. Used to write a regular column in the Gleaner newspaper. And he's actually one of the founders of CAPRI, the Caribbean Policy Research Institute. Dr. John Rapley, welcome to the program.
Bruce, it's good to be with you.
How are you?
I'm very well. How are you?
Yeah, I told you over the weekend that Jamaica is your second home and you've been neglecting it.
It is. No, I know. I feel it, Bruce. I do feel the do feel the call of the island, no question.
Well, you must find you know what back down here and I can see you again.
I'm working on it.
Tell me, CARICOM from a distance. Next year it's going to be 50 years. We have had a number of reports. There was a report that was done by the West India Commission, led by Sridas Rampal. More recently, Prime Minister Holness asked me to do an examination, not so much of CARICOM, it was primarily aimed at Jamaica's relationship with CARICOM. Since that time, there has been the Avinad Prasad, who you probably know, his report, which basically I thought provided a way out, no? What Prasad Committee, Team Task Force, what they recommend is that, look, it don't make sense waiting for everybody to get up to the same speed. Some are going to be slow, some are going to be faster. Let those who can find a common purpose in achieving all the goals and fulfilling the commitments that we have made, let them proceed and get their part of it going. And the others can catch up when they are ready. But even that doesn't seem to have ignited any enthusiasm among regional countries. Where are we? Is it that this thing just can't do anymore and we're just beating it over its head when we should be really taking a pragmatic view and saying, look, maybe we need to recalibrate all our hopes and expectations and be realistic and say, no, look, this is what it can do. This is what it has done. This is perhaps what we can tweak it a little more to do. But let us stop fooling ourselves about it achieving all these noble objectives, because that's not where they work. Is that where we are?
I think you said something a moment ago, Bruce, which is very, very apt, which is that what really binds us together in CARICOM, at least for a time, was a shared history. But that is about it. In every other respect, I think, in terms of geography, and as you say, at the level of the population, there's much less binding us. And of course, with the enlargement of CARICOM, it isn't even a common language and a common colonial history. I think we have to, and I always, when I was running CAPRI, I used to always, in meetings with government ministers from the Caribbean, I used to always say to them, we have to be a bit more humble and realistic in our expectations of what we can do. You take CARICOM as a whole, it has the population of a large American city, but in terms of its economic output, it has the economy of a mid-sized American city. Even a big country, relatively speaking, like Jamaica, the size of the economy is that of a mid-sized American town. I mean, we all get one seat at the United Nations, and so we sometimes think, well, that makes us all equals. And in one sense it does in the United Nations General Assembly. But in terms of economic weight, there's only so much we can do. And then when you add the fact that, well, in terms of natural trading partners, who are the natural trading partners, for example, of Jamaica, I used to always make a case that one can look at Jamaica as being essentially a part of the U.S. economy. It's, in some respects, you could say it's a labor reserve for the American economy. We produce human capital that serves not just the American economy, but in particular the American economy. And the gravity model of trade would suggest that most of our trade is going to be with the United States. And so there's only so much we can really accomplish in CARICOM, which it seems like a big enough organization. We say, well, you know, let's put it together. It's a population of 20 million and it's more than a dozen countries. But when you compare it to the other regional trade associations around the world, it's minuscule. And we just have to be honest about that, that there's only so much it is ever going to be able to accomplish. And that's not to say that having a shared culture isn't something worth promoting. You know, I think there's sort of exchanges you talked about, Bruce, when you were a student. That would be something worthy of encouragement, I think, for all sorts of reasons. But I think the idea that we're going to create industrial powerhouses based on intra-Caribbean trade, it doesn't stand to reason.
No,
I think we just have to be honest.
I agree with you
that.
entirely. And I mean, one of the things that we need to look at as well is that apart from the resource endowment that Guyana and Trinidad has, and to a lesser extent Jamaica with bauxite, the fact of the matter is that our future has to lie in services primarily.
I would think so. Yes.
John, can you allow me? I want to bring Richard Bernal into the discussion. He's someone I'm sure you know very well, and I wanted him to join the discussion. Dr. Richard Bernal, are you there?
Yes. Good morning. Good afternoon.
Yeah, I have John Rapley on the line as well.
Yes.
Now, we're talking about CARICOM, Richard. CARICOM next year will celebrate 50 years. The question I pose today is, has CARICOM reached as far as it can reach in terms of regional integration? And therefore, we are being unfairly cruel to ourselves when we keep beating up ourselves that, well, you know, implementation deficit, when in truth and in fact, there's not much more that it can do. We had a discussion earlier on, and I would love to hear you on this, Richard, well, both of you. We had a discussion earlier on when I had on Lisa Hanna and David Jessup. And we made the point that Guyana basically has the potential to feed the entire Caribbean. And what David Jessup was saying is that, you know, we need to make up our mind to remove the barriers to trade in agricultural goods, because food security, he wrote a column in the papers yesterday, food security is so critical that must now receive our attention. But if we were to do that, it would virtually wipe out the small farm industry in Jamaica. What do you do with our small farmers? Now, is that a political decision that any government can be expected to take, whether this one or some one in the future?
Okay, well, let me respond to your first question, which is, has CARICOM gone as far as it can? My answer is no, it has stalled. CARICOM has two main functions. One is the regional economic integration, and two, regional cooperation to mediate the encounter with global events. In regard to the first, there has been trade liberalization, but the share of trade which is involved in the region has remained small throughout the 50 years, and there's not much potential for further trade growth. There may be some in agriculture and food, but the real issue is that unlike integration processes like the EU and even with the North American free trade integration process, there has not been integration of capital markets and investment flows. If you look at the differences in interest rates and exchange rates, you will note big differences, and that signals that capital is not moving. It's the movement of capital and corporate integration which will take the CARICOM to a higher level of integration beyond where trade is. Remember, of course, integration doesn't get easier. You do the easy things first, so it gets harder. But the integration of capital markets, investment flows, a common investment regime, etc., all of those will help to move CARICOM further. On regional cooperation, the record has deteriorated recently. In the past, we cooperated effectively, and you and I know about the negotiations for the EPA agreement, an example of regional cooperation. Also, many institutions doing valuable work on a range of things, from climate change to disaster relief to a range of things. It has broken down recently and it needs to be rebuilt. Symptomatic of this is the divisions over candidates, as we saw recently in the election of the Secretary General of the CARICOM.
John, your comment?
Well, I want to underscore something Richard said, which is I agree that the thing that I believe CARICOM has done effectively, or can do effectively, but it probably needs to do more effectively now in light of what he's just said, is I do think in terms of pooling resources, particularly I think one of the more successful institutions or the effective ones in the past was the one that he himself ran for a while, the Caribbean Regional Negotiating Mechanism. And that is a huge improvement of the idea of these very small countries trying to negotiate trade deals on their own. We'll get a better hearing in the world. And again, we have to be realistic about the limitations. We are not, we're not Switzerland negotiating trade deals. We don't have as much to offer as we think we do, but certainly by pooling resources and then forming thereby strategic alliances with other emerging markets, there are ways we can leverage that kind of influence. And I think one of the things that I know speaking in the past with trade negotiators from, for example, the United States, is a frustration that you get sometimes the prime ministers of relatively small countries, very small countries, relatively speaking, sticking spokes in the works of these negotiations. I think that that's where we need to be prepared to sort of give up some sovereignty to regional bodies that can perhaps do better work for us. I would also agree in terms of the integration of capital markets. I mean, I do think that's an area where Jamaica would have an obvious comparative advantage, is its financial sector. I think there's a lot of scope for growth there, although we still come back to the problem you've raised, Bruce, is what does it do to small farmers in Jamaica? And that is a question that not just Jamaica, but just about every country in the world faces when it comes to liberalizing agriculture. Even the French, of course, have a hard time facing up to that. It is a thorny issue, there's no question.
But it may very well be that if the region is to move forward economically, that the farmer who is struggling to produce up in some mountain somewhere and battling drought one year and maybe in the same year flood rains, and his goods ending up on the supermarket shelves, and I have to buy it at a price that is much higher than I could otherwise if it was coming from a country that is better equipped to grow food. But it would involve a kind of rationalization of production across the region that I don't know that the individual countries are prepared to take that on. Richard, I'd love to hear you on this. Remember the Sonny Ramphel report?
Yeah,
made a big thing about the importance of a commission that would execute the decision of the heads. And once they took a decision, that would have automaticity in terms of its implementation in the various countries. That to me is going to run into some horrendous constitutional issues. How can it proceed if what Sonny Ramphel was saying is that without that, this thing is not going to go much further. And he was right, because it hasn't gone much further. But that thing that he recommended, I don't know that can work. And Jamaica is not the only bugbear in all of this. I found in my own experience when I sat as one of the heads of government, that there were other countries just that they were not perhaps as prepared as Jamaica to express concern about it.
Well, you put your finger on a very important issue, the limits to which countries are prepared to yield their national sovereignty to a regional process. It is clear in CARICOM that the governments are not prepared to yield more sovereignty than they have to date. And of course, that hinders the implementation process. Now, when I was doing the negotiations of the EPA, I had to spend more time getting a regional position internally than I did negotiating with the Europeans. In fact, getting a regional consensus was sometimes harder than negotiating with the EU. So they are not willing to yield that amount of sovereignty. Remember something, that we are islands separated by a considerable distance of sea, islands and land-based countries. And therefore, the sense of community has not developed to the extent that it might develop in regions where the countries have common borders, like in Europe or in North America. So I don't think we can expect the countries to give more of their sovereignty in the future. But there's no reason why we cannot collaborate more effectively in articulating and negotiating our position in the international arena.
But doesn't that mean, John Rapley, doesn't that mean that we ought to stop fooling around? We ought to say, no, look, all of these wonderful things that we had set out and made so many commitments about, it's not going to work because we're not prepared to cede the authority. Therefore, let us have a further revision of the treaty. Let us scale the thing down to what is workable, what we are prepared to proceed with enthusiastically, so that we won't have another generation that is being accused of having sat on an implementation deficit for years and done nothing at all about it. And so that we could really have something to celebrate in CARICOM. You know what somebody said to me? If CARICOM could just do one thing and get West Indies cricketers to start playing good again, then CARICOM would have been worth it. But are we not at a point where we need to go back to the drawing board and say, now, look, maybe we need to redesign this thing?
Well, I think what we need is basically a fundamental honesty about the strengths and the limitations of Caribbean integration. You know, Richard puts his finger on a very big issue, which is that we are not natural trading partners, which much of the Caribbean. It is easier and more lucrative to do trade with the North American market and to look into other markets, first off. Secondly, where I think there is a strength is in terms of regional cooperation in international fora. And I think we should sort of just say, well, let's do what we can be good at and what we can benefit from, and be prepared to say the rest of it, you know, let's not put so much energy into this. Look, you know, we have to remember, these are small resource constrained governments who have to pick and choose their battles. And I think that it is a pity that there's so much resistance to the kind of things that we can be good at, like trade negotiation, in favor of the things that aren't going to yield much fruit, like endlessly talk about certain forms of economic integration, which aren't really going to do very much. So, I mean, that would be my view, is let's be realistic, say, what does it cost us in terms of giving up sovereignty? What do we get in return? Because I don't think that kind of trade-off is very often explained to the average citizen. And I think if they did know it, if they were aware of, well, what are we actually getting or losing from the various arrangements being put before us, I think you might find more buy-in for the sorts of things that governments themselves are very reluctant to part with, namely their individual powers.
Well, you know, one measure of evaluation or assessment of CARICOM and its future perhaps can be found in the fact that the DOMREP for years, many, many years, had an application to join CARICOM, which CARICOM heads were reluctant to consider because many of them were afraid of the impact of DOMREP goods flooding their markets. Until we got to a point where DOMREP says, well, I'm no longer interested in joining. Because we have moved in a particular direction. We have moved ahead. You guys can remain there if you want. I just think that we need to be frank and honest. I think we keep fooling ourselves when we have these heads of government meetings and we come out with these well-sounding statements when we know in our heart of hearts that going back home and implementing those are not. I mean, look at the question of free movement. And then, we have to understand, what it means to a small country if Jamaicans are landing there in droves. But then It doesn't seem to have taken place in the OECS, where they have free movement, but the more advanced countries economically, like St. Kitts, don't seem to have come under any, and Antigua, don't seem to have come under any great stress because of free movement. Richard?
I agree with you that the agenda of objectives for CARICOM should be phased. I went to university in 1968, and the first thing I was given to read was a paper on a common currency for the West Indies Federation. That has stayed on the agenda of CARICOM ever since. Now, I think that you need to put aside or delay certain objectives, because each time you go and have a meeting and you talk about it and no progress is made, you demoralize and discredit those objectives. I think that we should focus on doable things. For example, a common investment code could allow a lot more investment to happen across the region and corporate integration across the region, which is what would remove the competition between each poultry producer in each country wanting to block poultry imports from a neighboring country. And let me say that the region is riven with differences. Take the case of St. Kitts with 40-something thousand people and Nevis, and they continue to argue about the degree of autonomy. Nevis is an island with a couple thousand people, which you can see from the coast of St. Kitts, and they are continually talking about autonomy. So the differences run right across the region. Now, there is fear throughout the Caribbean about numbers. The Bahamas is worried about Haitians. The Eastern Trinidad is worried about Grenadians. Barbados is worried about Guyanese. And everywhere else they're worried about Jamaicans and Haitians. And that is a very real fear. But the liberalization of movement of skilled people is something that's good for the region, and I think that needs to be emphasized. Remember, in the colonial period, anybody in the West Indies could go to any other country, study, live, and work. Once we got independence, we immediately put up barriers, and it is unfortunate that you have skill shortages in some countries, and they are having the necessity for import for work permits for fellow Caribbean people.
Almost out of time. I wanted to give you the final word.
So I think we're often looking at the wrong models. We think of CARICOM and we say, what are the other regional trading bodies, like ASEAN or like the East African Community or like ECOWAS? These are regional trading bodies with populations of hundreds of millions of people. I think we should sometimes, again, it's about humility. Look at these small states of Europe, for example. Look at Liechtenstein, Luxembourg. Look at Andorra. Look at Monaco. Look at San Marino. Look at these countries with similar populations to ours, surrounded by behemoths, relatively speaking. How do they manage their international relations? I think there's a lot of lessons to be learned in that. And of course, the first thing they do is recognize the limits of their own sovereignty. There's only so much they can do. And I think that's something that the big men of the Caribbean have been very reluctant to just face up to, is we have to realize what we can and can't do. We always want to be regarded as equals, but realistically, we would have more success if we recognized our limitations and then played to our strengths. And I think that we need to change our approach.
Out of time. Thank you both, Dr. Richard Bernal and Dr. John Rapley. Thank you so much for joining us. We're out of time. Sorry we weren't able to open up the lines because the discussion just kept going on and on. I hope you found it interesting. We won't be here next week because next week is a public holiday, Emancipation Day, but I'll be back the following week. So thank you all very much for joining us. Big up all those people in New York, all those people who are watching us on live streaming. Thank you so much for being with us today. We'll be back on Monday, the 8th of August. And by that time, independence would have passed. So Have a wonderful emancipendence, both emancipation celebration and independence, our 60th anniversary. God bless you all.